Hi, it's Steve. In this video, we'd like to show you how to change the gasket for the cover on your dishwasher pump. It's a really easy repair. Let me show you how we do it. Now, to do this repair, we'll need to remove all the dishes from your dish racks and then remove the racks from the dishwasher itself and set them aside, and then we can do the repair. So we'll begin with the upper rack. We'll just pull the rails out. We'll need to remove the rack stops. On most of these, there is a flexible tab at the top of that rack stop. We simply need to push it towards the front. Then pull the stop out and set it aside. We'll do the same procedure on the opposite rail. Now, depending on your model, you may have a different style of rack stop, but we need to remove them both. Pull the rack completely out of the dishwasher and set it aside. You can push the rails back in out of the way. Again, we'll remove the bottom rack and set that aside. Our next step will be to remove the lower spray arm. Simply loosen the nut. Lift the spray arm off and just set it aside. Now, our next step will be to disengage this rear manifold from the pump cover itself. Now, there are a couple of ways that we can do that. We can just force it back and disconnect it, or you can simply remove the top screws on there, because we will need to do that anyways. This method puts less stress on that rear manifold, so we suggest you do it this way. These screws are a number 15 Torx head screw. And simply lift up on the pump cover, pull it slightly forward, and then while holding that rear manifold, just work the pump cover out of that. You can actually then pull that manifold down and disengage it from this little mounting tab on the back wall. And then just tuck it over to the left-hand side. Now, our next step is to remove the accumulator assembly, and to do that we need to take the impeller off. Now, the impeller has a 1-inch hex shape molded into the top of the impeller itself, and the impeller is held to the motor shaft by a 1/4-inch hex head screw. So we'll need to hold the impeller from turning and then remove that 1/4-inch screw. Now, first we'll just try to hold that impeller by hand and try removing that screw. And typically they're on there pretty tight, so normally you'll need to employ a different method. Again, you can put a wrench on that 1-inch hex shape on top of the impeller. The angle is a little difficult. Or you can take a deep 1-inch socket, sit that on it, using a 1/4-inch nut driver down through the center. We'll grasp that socket firmly with a pair of pliers. And then we can loosen that screw. Once you've loosened the screw completely, simply lift the impeller off and set it aside. That now exposes 4 more screws that secure that accumulator to the top of the pump. And we'll carefully lift the accumulator away from the pump bottom. Well, next we'll need to remove the chopper blade and the spring assembly. Simply grasp both of them and pull them away from the stem that is attached to the drive motor, and we'll just set that aside. Now, there's a single screw that secures that cover to the top of the pump. Again, a number 15 Torx head screw.
You can then lift that cover off. So next we'll remove the remainder of the old gasket and discard it. We'll also take these two check balls. We'll just set those aside. Next we'll place the new gasket into that opening. Make sure the surface is clean first. Your gasket may have come with the insert still intact. You simply need to peel that away without damaging the gasket. Next, we'll put the pump cover back into place. Line that up, make sure it sits flush. We'll secure it with the single screw. And just drop those two check balls into that oval opening. We'll reinstall the chopper blade and spring assembly. Just line up the hook on the end of that spring with one of the two holes in that stem. And also take note that one side of that stem is flat and the other has a half groove cut in it. So our next step is to reposition the accumulator, and we'll want to make sure that we line that up properly. You'll note that there is an oval opening that has to line up over top of the oval opening in that cover. And you can only put this on one way, just due to the configuration of those 4 screws, but this will help line it up properly. And now we'll secure the 4 screws. Tighten these screws alternately to make sure that we don't get any of them in there crooked. Next, we'll reinstall the impeller. And you'll note, if we look down through the center opening in the bottom of that impeller, that there is one flat side and a small rib opposing it. We need to make sure that we line up that flat side with the flat side of the hub on the pump motor itself. We'll then start that screw into the top of the motor shaft. Need to make sure that that's tight. So we'll need to secure that impeller from turning while we tighten the screw. Again, we'll use the 1-inch socket and then our 1/4-inch nut driver down through the middle. And tighten it securely. Now next, we're ready to reinstall the outlet cover. We'll begin by pulling the manifold back into place. Be sure to engage that tab on the back wall and fit the cover outlet into that manifold. Line the cover up, and then we'll install the screws. And we suggest you alternate the installation of these screws to make sure we don't bind that top or twist it. And now we're ready to put the bottom spray arm back on. We'll begin by making sure that the bottom bearing is in place on top of that cover. Position the spray arm on the pump cover. Tighten the nut, make sure it turns freely. And now we're ready to put the racks back in.
We'll begin by putting the bottom rack back in place. And we'll pull the rails for the upper rack fully out from the dishwasher. Line up the rear wheels first. We're then ready to reinstall those rack stops. Again, we'll make sure that the little locking tab is pointing up. Slide it down through the opening on the ends of the rails. Push it down firmly until it locks in place. Do the same on the opposite side. You can push that rack back into place. We'll close the dishwasher up. And our repair is complete.